And we are live.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
This is quite a personal session, I think, for me, because the reason I wanted to do a discussion on this topic was, in part, it was because when I went through this myself a few years back, it had a much bigger impact on me than I think I would ever have expected. And through all of the kind of talking to other HR professionals that I do as part of Evolving HR, became pretty apparent that there's a lot of it around at the moment. There's a lot of people are being made redundant at the moment or are in consultation processes. And I thought it would be really good to have a conversation about it. I think there's a lot of information out there about how to handle redundancy meetings when you're the HR person on one side of the table, but there isn't so much about what it feels like to experience it when you're on the receiving end. Mm-hmm. So I've asked this wonderful panel to join me today because they've all got slightly different perspectives and areas of expertise, and I will let them introduce themselves. So June, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. So, thank you for inviting me along. So, I'm June Hogan. So, I am now a career coach and outplacement specialist. I've been doing that since 2019, but my background is HR. I started my career in the automotive industry and was kind of a graduate and moved up to senior manager within sort of 8 years, and everything was going well. Then I had my first experience of redundancy when the company went into administration. So, I lost my job overnight in my early 30s, along with thousands of other people. Big mortgage, young baby. That was not what was supposed to happen at that time in my career. What followed was a difficult time in my life. I was out of work for 18 months. During that time, I had a baby. And I was also diagnosed with life-threatening illness. So I was left with navigating redundancy and navigating that to find my next role. I moved on to work for Wolseley, who are the world's leading supplier of plumbing and heating products. I was HR business partner there. Managing redundancies was part of my role. And then I was made redundant for the second time whilst on maternity leave, which was quite challenging. And that led me to think differently about my career. I took some time out. I did some consultancy. Then I went to live overseas in North America, and that was where I trained to become a coach. And when I came back to the UK 3 years later, I didn't have a job to go back to. So I thought I'd give self-employment a go. And I've been working with companies who want to do the right thing by providing outplacement support to people who leave, and really fulfilling work. I feel like I found my place and really enjoy the work that I do and the difference that it makes to people every day. So that's a quick, I have to breathe now. That was that.
Potted history, but no, a breadth of experience on both sides of the table there, which is helpful for this conversation. I mean, it's horrible that you had to go through that. And if I had a pound for every time someone tells me they got made redundant whilst on maternity leave, I could probably have retired about 10 years ago. But I feel like that's a conversation for another day. Sassy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, thanks, Kirsty. Yeah, so I am Sassy. People who may be following me on LinkedIn may have seen me as Sarah. Sarah's my real name, but I go by Sassy on Facebook. So either or is absolutely fine. And I'm here really representing the HR Confidence Club and myself, of course. But I do work full time at a university. And my experience of redundancy was some years ago now. It's probably 13, 14 years ago. But I was actually redeployed, so I can talk about that experience and all the feelings associated there. But I do get people coming to me as well as part of the Confidence Club and the impact that their redundancies have had on them and the confidence that's been affected.
And that was exactly why I wanted you to be on the panel from a confidence perspective, because, I mean, we'll get into this in a minute, obviously, but we think that, you lose your job, you've got to find another job. But it's never as simple as that. And it does have an enormous impact on confidence. So I thought your expertise in that area would be particularly useful. So thank you for joining me. And Priscilla.
Hi, thanks, Kirsty. So I'm Priscilla. I'm still in-house in HR and have been for 20 something odd years now. I went through redundancy and it was a really difficult time for me. Wasn't expecting to go through it. It was my first ever time. And kind of I learned about my resilience and that, it didn't really exist. Now I am studying to become a counsellor in the future with a view that I will eventually go kind of self-employed. But yeah, we can talk about a bit more and how I've got there in terms of as part of this conversation. So really glad to be here with you guys.
Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to jump right into the questions that I want us to cover today. So we often talk about redundancy in professional terms, and we've covered a little bit in the intros there that it feels very different when it's happening to you, and it has quite an impact on a personal level. So Priscilla, are you happy to share your own experience in terms of how you felt when that happened to you, and I guess sort of how different it was versus being the person doing the telling rather than receiving the message?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a huge shock. And we do talk about it, and we say that it is a professional thing, and it's not you, it's the role. We say all of those things. But ultimately, you know, when you are sat on the receiving end of that conversation, it feels incredibly personal, and you feel completely exposed. And I remember bursting into tears, like not really knowing what to do with myself. And, you know, it felt very personal. And some of the content of the discussion was personal, you know, but ultimately, you know, in that moment, I was completely destroyed. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I just remember hanging up and thinking, what the hell do I do now? And just being in tears. And then my mum just randomly turned up, and I was like, oh my God, I've just been made redundant, you know, all of these things. And you just don't expect it to kind of happen, or you hope it won't happen to you. And I think you know, I've done many of these conversations myself, and just, you know, to be on the other side of it now and to know what it's like to go through that, you know, I think differently about it when I go in and all of those things, because you can say it's not about the person, but that person is going to feel it is about them. And there is no way to get around that. And, you know, when I think back to how many times I've done it in the past and how I probably could have done it better, you know, now that's learning that I have, but it's still not a nice thing to have to go through to learn that, if that makes sense. But yeah, from a HR perspective, it's just, yeah, devastating.
And just a little tangent there, because my brain does tangents really well. In the subsequent years since you were made redundant, do you now do anything differently if you have to tell somebody else about their role being made redundant? Because I know I've always thought I tried to be empathetic and kind about it, insofar as you can be kind when you're kind of ruining someone's day. What do you now do differently, just out of interest, if you have to do any more recently?
I think I mean, I've had to do some recently. I think I advocate better behind the scenes. I make sure that, you know, managers are better prepared and understand what they are saying and why they're saying it. So, you know, I think I'm stronger in terms of doing that advocacy at the back end, you know, and ultimately being more open to kind of compromise. And equally, I'm more willing to sit down with that individual. So a recent one I did, I sat down with someone ahead of the conversation to say, this is going to happen. Like, this is the conversation we're going to be having. And, you know, do you have any questions for me at this point? So because it felt more personal to do that, it wasn't therefore coming out of the blue, a random letter just drops in your inbox kind of thing. So I think that's what I'm trying to do behind the scenes. I think it's impossible to say that I would do it perfectly in every scenario, because there will always be something and someone's emotions will cloud what they're hearing. But I think it's just that preparation. It's making managers sure and clear on what they're doing, what they're saying, you know, just to make sure that they understand that they, you know, the empathy side of it and how that person's going to be feeling. I think that's how I try and do it differently now.
June, what was your experience in terms of the, you know, how it was handled and the impact on you at the time?
I mean, the first time it was a company went to administration, so it's fairly clear cut. I mean, it was still devastating. I remember ringing up my manager. I saw it on the news, and I said, "Oh, so what should I do tomorrow then?" He says, "Well, nothing." He says, "There's no job. That's it." I was like, "Oh," you know, kind of, and I can still remember where I was, what it felt like, all of that. There's life-changing moments. I'm sure we all can. You can remember when you hear those words. But the second time, the process was handled really well. Yes, I was on maternity leave, but what felt, and I can still remember that feeling of when your stomach just drops, is when my manager told me those words, I literally have no recollection of what else happened in that room after she said those words. And that you were saying, Priscilla, about how do you think differently about when you're handling things? You know, that's one thing that I would advise anyone. People will not hear anything after they've heard that. And also thinking about the logistics. So I'd been on maternity leave, and if you hadn't been in that position, you might not have thought. I had to walk through an open plan office to come in to have the meeting, and everyone was like, "Oh, how are you?" Like, well, you know, not great. Went to the meeting, and then I couldn't get out of the room quick enough, and of course I had to then navigate all of that again. And they're just little details that, if you're thinking about people in different circumstances, can make a big difference. But you know, the process was handled as well as it could be, and but I think you're absolutely right. When you've been on the other side, you do have that different perspective, for sure.
Yeah. I just have to jump in about my experience because it was spectacularly badly handled. It wasn't when they said the words to me that my stomach fell. It was the fact that they had disabled my security pass before I got to the office that day. So I laugh about it now. I got to the office on the 27th of December. I say that because it was blooming Christmas. I mean, for starters, like, it was Christmas. And I couldn't get in. And I made a joke to the receptionist about, I've obviously been fired. And she said, "You can't get fired. You're the head of HR." And then the office manager appeared and said, "Kirsty, could you come with me, please?" And I was like, "Oh my God. Oh, I have been let go." And the poor receptionist was mortified. She didn't know where to look. And I was like, "I'm really sorry. I cracked a terrible joke." I've never done that to anybody in my entire HR career, and I don't know what they would think. We never did it as a company. We never did that to anybody. I don't know what they thought I was going to do. It's very bizarre, because it was only me going. It wasn't part of a big redundancy exercise. And so there's ways and ways, aren't there, of breaking that message to people. Sassy, it sounds like you had a slightly better experience in terms of you got a suitable alternative role out of it, but how did it impact you at the time while you were going through that process? Because there's always that period of uncertainty, isn't there, during consultation?
Yeah, and I think it was all the lead up, because we were going through financial cuts, basically. And it was part of a big consultation. And I don't think it matters now that I tell you sort of where it was. And the only reason is because of the differences in the unions. So during this consultation period, the larger unions were basically saying, you can just get rid of all the professional support staff. That will make your cuts. We're far more important. So we had weeks of this kind of narrative and rumours going round, and it was fear. Don't get me wrong, I know it was coming from fear, but there was also an element of, wow, look at the job we do. We're so much better. We don't really need you, because we could do that if we needed to. So there was that. My role at the time was as a DEI specialist as well. So it wasn't in HR. We were separate. But again, there was that sense of, I mustn't have been very good at what I was doing. And you do just take it so personally. Could I have done anything differently? And you start that spiral of, maybe that conversation didn't go very well, and it's all come about as a result of that. So there's all those emotions going on as well. And then there was the judgments of others. Well, you perceive the judgments of others because of the comments that were being made. But, resign myself to the fact that role was going. There was a new role. I think it was 2 grades lower than I was on. So although it felt like a bit of a demotion, I was pay protected, so that was quite good. And then I decided to retrain and finish my HR qualifications. So in a way, when I look back now, I think it was a gift, but you don't see that at the time at all.
And you touched on something there when you talked about that feeling that you must have done something wrong. So I want to get on to the kind of shame element that it's impossible to hide from it. But people, why do we feel embarrassed about redundancy? And or did you feel embarrassed in your situation? I was horrified. I felt like an abject failure, that I had let everybody down. I'd let my husband down, and it didn't help that there were people in my family that were like, don't tell anybody you lost your job because it will look really bad. And so, that's there as well. That doesn't help. But did you get any sense of that? And how did you kind of change your mind shift afterwards? Because ultimately, it is a business decision. It is a business decision. And we know that. So I'm just interested in what you did to kind of snap out of that, if that was something that you experienced. And I'll come to you first on that, June.
Yeah, well, the first time it happened, I felt a huge amount of shame, because literally I knew even though thousands of other people had lost their jobs because the company had closed, within my peer group and within the people that I knew within my family, nobody had been made redundant. This was when jobs for life. You join a big company, you stay there forever. Oh, I got this graduate job. That was going to be where I stayed, So I did feel the shame because I had nobody else who'd experienced it. And I felt like I was kind of outside looking in on my life. It was very, very strange at the time. I say it wasn't fortunate. Unfortunately, when I got ill, that kind of overtook everything, and I kind of just had to navigate that. So I think in that respect, circumstances took over. But the second time it happened, like you were saying, Sassy, I was thinking, well, if I hadn't been part-time, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Maybe I should have worked full-time, and all of that. I was questioning all of that, and I think the shame is around that. There's something that you've done that's kind of innate in you that means you're not worthy. Brené Brown, who I love, talks a lot about shame, and this notion of when people can empathise is when shame can kind of, she calls it the antidote, doesn't she? So the second time it happened, I was a bit more kind of like, okay, this happens. Like I said, it's a business decision. I've just got to get on with it. But I had 3 young children. I wanted to work part-time. I was thinking, well, who's going to want to employ me? I'm a liability kind of thing. Who's going to want to give me those sorts of hours? This was back sort of 13 years ago. So I don't remember sort of snapping out of it as such, but I just had to have that mindset of, right, well, you're in this situation through no fault of your own. You're going to have to just get on with it. What can you control? What can't you control? So that kind of helped me, I think, to move forward. But having known what I know now, I probably would have done things kind of slightly differently. But at the time, I was just thinking, well, no one's going to get me out of this but me. So I've just got to kind of dig deep and approach it like a job. I've got to approach this job of finding a job like a job and kind of just get stuck in, really.
Yeah. Priscilla, did you experience any of that kind of shame and embarrassment?
Oh, yeah, totally. I didn't know anyone in my group. Like, a lot of my friends are self-employed and have always been self-employed, doing their business, like working in their businesses. So I didn't know anyone who kind of had gone through that, like June. And it was, and I was just horrified. Like I had that negative voice in my head going, you should have done this, and you should have done that, and you could have done this, and it was all your, I think that critical voice lasted and has lasted for a very, very long time. But ultimately I was just in got to get another job mode. So I kind of pushed all that aside and just really focused on what can I do? How can I ensure that I'm presenting myself in the best way? And, and I really focused in on that. And I got some help from someone who I'd worked with in terms of, how do I go about, interviewing? How do I address this situation? All of those things just to help me get over that hurdle to get back in employment. And, it did help, but the trauma just stays with you. And it did stay with me for an awfully long time. And it's only recently that I've been really able to deal with that. But I think there has been, redundancy had a stigma. Like back when I started, and I think some of us started in HR, it was kind of, redundancy happens, but it's individuals and it's because they're not very good. Whereas I think now redundancy just happens more often and we hear more about it. Whereas when I kind of first entered the profession, it wasn't really widely heard of. And so I think that was probably still playing in my mind. I definitely think it's a different situation now. It just happens more regularly, more often, and it is generally for business reasons. So, I think that has changed it, but I definitely think that voice was there.
I can remember years and years ago, I mean, talking late 90s, working for a big investment bank, and there would just be an edict one day, we need to cut 10% of headcount.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to every leader in the business, they've all got to cut 10% of their headcount, so go decide who it's going to be.
Yeah.
And, you know, that used to, I haven't had that for a long time, but that used to be what it was about. Mm-hmm. I've also worked in places where it's like, we're going to do last in, first out, which to me has never made any real sense because, you know, as a selection criteria, you might be getting rid of some of your best people just because they haven't been there very long. One of my biggest shocks was when I worked for a German organization, and we were told that in Germany, your family status counts for you if in a redundancy situation. So for the people, I remember we had this, it was, I've worked for a couple of German organizations, but it was a huge redundancy exercise. And they were saying, well, he'll be fine because he's got 3 kids. And I remember going, what? And they were like, well, you've got no kids, so you're more likely to be at risk than him because he's got 3. And I was like, this is wow. Okay. Didn't know that happened. So there are lots of different reasons why people get selected, which is really interesting. But I do think nowadays it is different. You're absolutely right. Sassy, I'd love your thoughts on, because it's part of the whole confidence thing, isn't it? Where somebody is experiencing that embarrassment about it, how would you suggest that they kind of try to build themselves back up and try to stop believing that inner voice? Because it's always us that tells us.
It is.
No one else is saying you should be really ashamed of yourself. Like,
we're terrible to ourselves. We really are, honestly. I think if we had to say the things out loud in front of somebody else that's in our head, we would not do it. But we don't do that, do we? And I think to start with, you do have to sit in the emotion and allow it to happen, because you try and force yourself through and you're probably just going to make that situation worse. But I think if you can talk to somebody who, like, you know, June just said about Brené and the shame and bringing it to life and talking about it, you can get over it a bit quicker. But I think it's about being really clear about, if you're going to talk to somebody, say, I don't want you to fix it because you can't fix it, but just listen to, I want to rant. I just want to rant at you for 10 minutes. I want to get it out. I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth, but can I just get it all out? And that gives a lot of relief about saying things that you're thinking for the first time out loud. But I remember the first couple of weeks when I'd started in this new role, and there was a lot of shame because I was still there. So I was still around all the people.
Yeah, that's a whole different dynamic there, isn't it?
Yeah, and they, you know, and you know, the consultation had finished. So those people not affected just went back to normal. And I was thinking, do you not remember the comments that you were making literally 2 weeks ago, or, you know, whenever it was? So there was that dynamic to think about. And yeah, I've never used the whole Kubler-Ross change curve so much as I have in the last few months. But it is really important. That's why I'm saying about the whole sitting in the feelings and working out where you are with that, because of how you might want to respond. You might not want to respond when you're in the angry stage. You might just want to have a rant to somebody. But I remember at one point, I was in this new role. The old role didn't exist. They weren't going to do DE&I stuff. And yet they were coming to me to ask me when it was 2 grades lower and there's all this stuff. And I'm like, hang on a minute. And I could see myself changing through this Kubler-Ross curve. And I thought, you can't respond in the angry stage, so you need to wait until that passes. But I remember looking at things more objectively and saying, you know, yes, of course I can do that thing, but that isn't my role anymore. And you've made the decision as an organisation not to do that. So I think what I'm trying to say is, when you get to a point where you're not as emotional and you can be a little bit more objective, then that really helps, and questioning your inner critic and your inner voices.
And I hope that's helpful. I noticed that Donna's put a comment in the chat saying, after 32 years with the same company, it's very strange being on the other side of the change curve. The imposter syndrome voice has been loud.
Mm-hmm.
And I, sending you huge compassion for that, Donna. It is, that voice does turn the volume up massively. But like we were saying, you're the only one that's telling yourself that. There isn't anybody else that thinks that you can't go into another amazing job. I think one of the things that I've done to rationalize it a little bit. So we were talking before about how it can feel intensely personal. And I think a lot of people, and I see this a lot with HR professionals, we put a lot of ourselves into our work, a lot. And so it becomes almost part of your identity. Mm-hmm. And so when that is taken away, you feel like you've lost a part of yourself. And I know that was exactly what happened with me. I had been with the organization for quite some time, and I didn't know who I was without that job. I kind of had to start from scratch. And I always talk about like personal values, that kind of thing, because one of the first things I did was a values exercise to like work out like what actually is important to me. Who am I? How do I want to show up in the world? Because I'd never done it before. I'd worked for companies with values, but it was always honesty and integrity. And you're like, yeah, great, lovely. I actually think those two should be a given, and that values should be like in addition to that, like be a decent human being. And then, so it's, for me, it was almost like that rediscovery of who I was. So I just, I guess what I'd like to, that wasn't Buddy's bark. That was a bigger dog. Yeah, okay. That's yours, is it, June? Sorry. Priscilla has a teeny tiny dog, and that was a really beefy bark. So that was not him.
I'll get someone to put him away.
Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. I was just thinking, well, it's Buddy's voice.
Buddy's loud. He is loud, but it doesn't sound like that.
You need to show him now. Get if people have seen him.
He's on my lap. Hold on.
Is he having a nap?
He's always having a nap on my lap. Here we go. This is.
Oh, look at it.
Look at that.
This is my little friend.
Imagine if he did bark like that.
It would be hilarious. It would be like watching a movie with bad dubbing.
He's definitely got bedhead right now, so as well, because he's lying on my lap.
Oh my gosh. In terms of, when it comes to that whole sense of identity and confidence, how can you deal with that? And we've talked a little bit about imposter syndrome. We've talked a little bit about, I love what you were saying, Sassy, about the curve and not reacting when you're angry, that kind of thing. But in terms of rebuilding confidence, what are some of the tips that you would give? And I'll ask you this, Sassy, because you're the confidence guru, but then I'll also ask June and Priscilla what they did personally. But yeah, how do you go about rebuilding confidence if you've had it kind of shattered?
Okay. Well, and it isn't a magic wand, I'm afraid. It isn't an overnight thing, as I'm sure. I wish. Like, here you go. Here are all the things that you need to do. I think where to start. Ultimately, you've got to make the decision that you want to change. That's the catalyst. But there's probably a whole load of things before then. And some of it is about recognizing, one, how you're feeling. Why are you feeling it? Maybe writing it down or speaking it into a phone or something, so you can go back maybe when you're not feeling so low. Because our reactions and emotions and feelings are going to change all the time. I know some people don't like to journal, but I do quite like getting things out of my head. I don't really have a journal per se, but I do like to write it down because I find that I mull stuff over. It just keeps going on in my head, and then I can't get out of that spiral, and I can't make sense of it whilst it's in my head. So I would say, for challenging your imposter, and you touched on this earlier anyway, Kirsty, around writing some of those things down, and then starting to challenge it. It's like, well, why am I thinking like this? Okay, yes, I'm in a really crap place. Can I say crap? I don't know if I say crap. Oh my God, I said it 3 times.
Say crap. Just don't say fuck or bugger.
And then start to question, well, where's that evidence? Is there any evidence that supports how I'm feeling? Because there probably isn't, actually. You've started to piece a different jigsaw together. And then you've got to start to remind yourself of all the bloody brilliant things that you can do, your skills, because this one thing doesn't define us as much as we do think it is. We do, but it doesn't define us. And we've really got to start to challenge some of those beliefs, because whilst they're still in our head, we're going to just reinforce them and find things that meet that. You know, we're going to find other things and go, oh yeah, that's why I think that thing, and that's why that's happened. And you've got to start to challenge those beliefs. Did I answer your question? Sorry, I do waffle a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Donna's just added there, she's put, haha, I recorded lots of rants into my notes during the night, especially as I was the consultation rep too. It's cathartic to do it. It's just like, I'm a massive advocate of writing. And my journal's not a journal as such. I do Julia Cameron's morning pages. If anybody knows that, Julia Cameron wrote a book called The Artist's Way. And one of the things that she advocates is 3 pages of free form, straight out of your head onto the page every morning. I've been doing it for about 4 years now. And I never throw the notebooks away, but equally, I never go back and read them. And the ones that I wrote after I got made redundant, I'm not joking. So I love a little bit of woo-woo stuff. I actually did a sage cleanse of my office with those outside of it, so that energy wasn't in my office anymore at home, because there was an awful lot of and I will never go back and read them. I don't need to be reminded of how I felt at that time, but good Lord, did it feel good to get it out on paper. I think it makes it real. When you say it to somebody with your mouth or you write it down with your hand, it's out of your head. And huge advocate of that. Priscilla, what have you done? What are some of the things that have helped you to regain your confidence?
Gosh, well, I've been on quite the journey since, and had to rebuild my confidence from that, and also having to have a big operation. So, it was kind of the double whammy at the same time, because I was chronically ill when I was made redundant. But I think for me, I think it was my network. I think it was like getting out there and talking to people and really focusing on that. I think the old me probably wouldn't have done any of that. But, I was a bit aloof to needing that network and needing that support of other people around you. But I think the more you reach out, the more people you meet in a similar circumstance, and you can talk to them and relate to them in a different way, and you hear where they've come and how they've got through it. And I think that really helped me. But equally, writing stuff down, just getting it out of my head was one of those things as well. But equally, I did some talking therapy as well, which I've only just finished. And I think, I hadn't realized just how it had affected me and how it had changed in the way I behaved in certain ways. And I think, that was super, super helpful, because I'm not always someone who will share my feelings and do all of those things. And certainly not with family and friends who always have advice and an opinion and, and all those kind of things. Whereas in that counselling scenario, you're just talking to someone who's just there to listen. And it truly is a gift. And so I would say to anyone, don't neglect that bit as well, because it can help you. And there's so many ways in which you can get that support and help. I am an advocate for it. I'm also training to become one. So I don't do it from an agenda perspective. I just think it was one of the biggest things for me to help. If you're like me and you're not someone who talks openly and about how you feel and your feelings with other people, then, that was a great way and a great space for me to be able to do that and learn how to address those things and reflect back on who I was and why I made certain decisions and, all of those aspects. But yeah, I think that and my network, I just know more people now. I have, a greater understanding of what other people have been through and all of those things. That was huge for me.
Because it can feel quite lonely, can't it? But I think actually when you realise how many other people have experienced something similar, it doesn't feel quite so overwhelming.
No.
And you don't feel like such a pariah, because you're like, actually, there's loads of people. I mean, all four of us on this call have been in that position before. So it's, that just goes to show. How about you, June? What was helpful for you in terms of rebuilding confidence?
I think, all of the things that Sassy and Priscilla have said are hugely important. I wish I knew all this stuff, kind of 13 years ago. And I certainly know a lot more now, and having discovered, resources and, authors and that kind of thing. But one of the things that I think helped me, and I also, when I'm talking to clients as well, is trying to separate yourself from the situation and because often we're knitted in, aren't we? We feel like the redundancy is part of us, our jobs are part of us. It's just this big ball of wool. And if you can try and pull yourself apart, and that's what I did. And I thought, well, okay, yes, this has happened, but this doesn't, and you said it before, this doesn't change who I am. It's not because of anything I've done. It's a business decision. And the more I was able to distance myself from the redundancy, the easier it became to try and move forward. And the pressure of having to pay the bills and all of that was that motivation of you've got to, no one can do this but you. And so I think that for me, that was that kind of turning point of really trying to put what's happened behind me. And I think about this in terms of like a timeline. I think can be quite nice. You do that career timeline, and yes, redundancy fits here. But before that, what was everything else you were doing? Thinking about all of that great stuff, and then redundancy comes, and it's this blip in the middle, or maybe a blip's an understatement. But there is always life after redundancy, and we are here to kind of testament to that. And having worked with hundreds of clients, I can vouch for that as well. So I think that separation of myself from the situation really helped me, and that's something that I see when I'm working with people as well.
I'm going to stay with you, June, for the next question, because I want to get into like the whole job hunting piece. And this is something that I've always thought, when you're in a situation where you're not feeling at your best because you've been let go from your job, and you may be experiencing like all of the emotions that we've already talked about. Couple that with the fact that the recruitment market right now and in the last few years is brutal. We hear constant stories about candidates getting ghosted, about applying for an applicant, never hearing another word from an application, and all of that. There's a lot of competition out there. Because obviously with what you do, pretty much everybody you talk to is going through that. How can people stay motivated in a pretty crummy job market when they're not feeling like, hey, I'm amazing, I'm really ready to go sell myself in every interview? Like, how do you address that with people?
Yeah, and it's one of the hardest parts. And I think being realistic, as you've just described there, about the job market is not kind of sugarcoating it. So I would never say to somebody, you'll find a job really quickly, because you just can't tell. And it's that kind of Stephen Covey circle of control, circle of influence. What's inside my control, what's outside of my control, and trying to help people make their circle of control bigger than the things outside. So things like recruiters not getting back to you. There are things you can do. You can follow up. I would recommend no more than twice. But after you've done that, you literally draw a line under it, because there's you can't control that aspect of it. Routine and structure. So figuring out new structures, new routines, so that it isn't literally just sit at your desk and doom scroll for 8 hours a day, because that does nothing for anyone's mental health, and neither is it productive. So thinking about when will you do the job search, noticing your energy, that kind of thing, rewards when you've done it, making time for other things. So it's approaching it like a project, approaching it like a job, but doing it on your terms, and having time for other things in your life, and getting outside and exercise and all that kind of thing to sort of balance all of that. And essentially it is that, well, how much of this can I control, and how much of this is just, as you said, the market, bad processes, bad feedback, but also that, going into all the technical details, but having a job search strategy that covers lots of bases. So you're not just looking on Reed all day long, or you're not just using LinkedIn, or you're not just putting all your eggs into a couple of recruiters. You're spreading the net, and you've got a bit of a plan. So there's the kind of the tactical stuff, and then there's the practical stuff. And then, as you said before about, well, if Sassy was saying about those emotions, if you're stuck in that angry phase when you wake up in the morning, probably not the best time to start looking online. Or if you're feeling really low, maybe leave it, because actually, a job will still be there. If it was advertised at 8 o'clock in the morning, it'll still be there at 12 or whatever. So noticing some of that, I think, is important. So without turning this into a webinar of my own, hopefully it's giving you a few.
It's important. I mean, I think for me, some of the ways that I reframed it last time I was looking for a job is try not to get personally invested in a role from the early stages. And I don't like the use of the word rejection either. You have not been rejected. They've just found somebody who was a better fit than you are. And that's okay, because you're not going to be the best fit for every single job you apply for. And you're on the basis that you only need one job, you're going to get a lot of no's before you get a yes. And I think when I was able to genuinely believe all of that, it made such a massive difference. Like, you get a call and they go, "Oh, we're not taking it any further." And you think, okay, then that wasn't the one for me. And it lessened that feeling of personal rejection. And I think it's very easy for us to get into that mindset of no one wants me, I've been rejected. And it's, you as HR professionals, we've all been involved in job decisions where it was that close between two candidates and we just had to call it. And for that other person, they're going to feel like they have been rejected. And it's actually like, no, you were really, really close. It's just this one has got this little edge over you. And that's not a bad thing. So I don't know, for me, that I found that quite helpful. But is there anything else on that side of things that you would add, Sassy?
Well, and I think you touched on it earlier, Kirsty, around values, and they're so important. And I massively lost sight, forgotten mine really, when I was at my lowest and I needed some time off. And what I've observed, and I might be wrong, but because I haven't spoken in depth with people, but I've seen chats and things going on. And I do think sometimes there can be an element of desperation, which I get, because people have got to pay their bills. So I think it can be like a scattergun approach to finding a role, which actually probably isn't the one for them anyway. If they
I made that mistake.
We all do for various, I've applied for jobs in the past and they've not been the right job. And then I've been crushed because I didn't get the job and didn't even get an interview. And I look back now and I'm like, well, that was never going to be the right job for me. I've applied for it anyway. Now I'm gutted I didn't get an interview. So, yeah, I would say, are we applying for things for the right reasons? But like you said, don't get so invested that then you're crushed, because actually that is your dream job and you've put all your eggs into one basket. So, again, I think it's about objectivity if you can.
Anything you'd add, Priscilla?
I think for me it was, I think we underestimate the importance of those outplacement services, and where you can just you can have somebody like objectively review your CV and give you some tips, and then kind of you can practice kind of the interview technique and all of those kind of things. But I think for me, I grew in confidence in interviews probably as I did more of them. And I wasn't I wasn't always successful, but I also made sure that I invested in self-care, and that's so important. So for me, it was just getting out, doing something, maybe popping to the zoo or doing something that was fun that just took me away from the job application process. And, and equally, it was just asking for the feedback. I mean, let's face it, you don't always get really useful feedback.
I assume I'm never going to, and if I do, then it's a bonus.
Yeah, exactly. So I did ask. Some of it was good, some of it was absolutely useless, but it just helped me to build as I was going, in terms of with regards to just feeling a bit more confident when I was going into roles and just trying to be myself. But it's hard because you feel like yourself isn't good enough, and I remember feeling that way. And ultimately just wanting to get back in the workplace, but I can look back now and see it kind of as a gift. It was time, and, I was able to do stuff and think and have the time to apply and all of those things. But when you're in it, you're not thinking that way. But yeah, those outplacement services and just making sure you invest in self-care, that was the way I got through that recruitment process and being out there in the market.
And you mentioned You mentioned about that time being a gift. I mean, I took 6 months. I mean, there is an advantage sometimes when you're made redundant. If you've been with a company for a long time, you do at least get some sort of severance pay, which takes that like immediate pressure off. Especially if you work for an organization that doesn't just pay statutory redundancy. If you've just got statutory redundancy, then obviously it's a little bit trickier. Have there been, I'll stay with you, Priscilla, have there been any opportunities that have opened up for you as a result of redundancy? So let's talk about the good side of it. Or with people. Go on, Sassy,
Sorry, just before you move on, one very quick thing that really built my confidence the first time I applied for a job after feeling really low again was celebrating all the little wins. So I hadn't updated my CV for, I don't know, about 6-7 years. So just the process of doing that and then remembering all the things that I'd done really helped me. And tiny little steps getting through to each stage. I did a post about it actually, and there was about 20 things that I really celebrated because they were big for me doing that, applying for my first job, getting shortlisted, going to Bristol to suss it all out. So that's really important, and I think we should do more of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That is a really good point. It's not just about the end goal; it's about all the little wins along the way as well. Priscilla, sorry. Have there been opportunities that have opened up for you as a result of being made redundant, or have you seen that with other people if it's not something that's happened to you?
So for me, opportunities are probably even just being here. Like there's no way in the world I would have done something like this in the past. Kirsty, I probably never would have even connected with you and the amazing group that is, that we have, and we're on WhatsApp. And I certainly wouldn't have attended any of the training stuff that you have there and you put out there. And ultimately probably never would have ended up with Buddy and I don't think I would have had the time or thought to be doing the studying that I'm doing now and thinking about what I really want in the future. Studying, I have to say, studying to be a counsellor is the best thing I've probably ever done. Would I have done it? I don't know. I can't say. So I kind of feel like whenever I'm thinking about the future, it is opportunity, no matter what comes along. And I just think it's amazing where I am now in terms of, I just don't think I would be here if I hadn't had that experience. And you don't feel like that at the time, but now I can look back and go, yeah, in some ways, we've said it before, it was a bit of a gift, and it just opened my eyes, and opportunities just kept popping up. So, it's now I look back on it and think, yes, amazing, but at the time, not so much. So there is hope and there is opportunity and there is, that light at the end of the tunnel, really.
I mean, it absolutely changed my working life, like 100% for the better. I've set up my own business, but the first thing that I did was I used some of my severance money and I did a coaching qualification, and I actually did a strategic HR management qualification with Cornell University as well, because I wanted to learn again. I wanted some HR technical stuff. I hadn't done anything since my CIPD, and that was just wonderful. So it gave me the opportunity to do some study, to have some time out, and I've ended up doing something so completely different to what I was doing before. And it's funny, I think one of the other big opportunities that came out of it for me is I was a speaker at the first HR Big Meet, and what I spoke about was the story of when I got let go and how I rebuilt myself and how I developed my resilience after that. And I tell that story now and people are always like, oh, that sounds awful. Yeah, it was absolutely horrible at the time, but it was quite a long time ago now. So I'm all good. But the thing that's really funny is, like, my husband called it on day one. Like, when I drove home from being let go, and I know I've told you this before, Priscilla, I drove home, I parked the car, and he came down to the garage and he put his hands on my shoulders and he said, this is going to be the best thing that's ever happened to you. And I went, okay, can I cry now? And then can we go to the pub? And I did both of those things, but he knew that I was unhappy, and he knew that it was a blessing in disguise. It took me a little while longer to get there, but I married a wise man. How about you, Sassy? What sort of, have you seen people having opportunities created for them and kind of changing things as a result of redundancy.
Yeah, absolutely. But what I would say is you do need to embrace those opportunities, because they can sometimes come along and you're not in the mindset to think it's a gift or think it's an opportunity, or you still haven't done the work, or wherever you are on the curve. So you back them away. And what I would say is, as sort of fearful or anxiety provoking as they might be, absolutely say yes to an opportunity, and seek out a network or support to help you with it. And to be honest, I haven't spoken to lots of people, but I haven't heard of anybody that's gone, well, actually, I wouldn't be doing this thing now if it wasn't for that. So I don't know anybody who's still in a really bad place as a result of it. So lots of things can come your way, but you have to be willing to say yes to it, even if you're not ready, even if it's terrifying.
Yeah. And it's a good opportunity to plug the HR Confidence Club, actually, because I think that's exactly the sort of community and network that would be really helpful for people. So is it LinkedIn? Is it Facebook as well? What's the best way for people if they want to join?
Well, see, I don't know where people want to hang out really, but the majority of people are on LinkedIn. And what I've noticed is people don't tend to engage that much on there. And I don't know whether that's because you can't post anonymously. And some of the things we obviously want to talk about are really like personal, confidence, beliefy type stuff. We want to be quite vulnerable, don't we? So I have put a poll out to say, shall we move platforms? And people are going, no, it's all right. So LinkedIn, really. I do have a WhatsApp group as well, but haven't really promoted that because of my time. Haven't got enough hours in the day, really. But yeah, I'd like it to be a bit more engaging. I'd like it to be that community of others helping others and supporting one another, and it not just like being me, because I don't know all the answers. But yeah, I do think it's something that's needed, and yeah, over the next year I need to sort of see, well, where can it go and how can I help more people, because I really believe that we shouldn't be in this situation. I think it's preventable.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm conscious of time because, as always, I've gone off on tangents. So let me ask you, from an HR perspective, actually, let me share with you. Somebody sent me a private message during this conversation, and it kind of leads into the last question that I want to ask. So what is your view on the statements Meta have made about redundancy, where they've linked their exits to poor performance? Do you feel that this has tainted individuals who were strong performers? Now, I find that really interesting because they don't really have the concept of redundancy in the States. And I don't know if Meta have also done this in Europe, but we have consultation periods and selection criteria and things like that. So you wouldn't normally explicitly state it's linked to poor performance, or you'd have to have very good evidence and like performance improvement plans and all of that kind of thing. So I don't know, but just interested in your thought. I think that sometimes some of these big organizations handle redundancy situations pretty badly. And that was my last question, is like, from an HR perspective, do you see companies handle this kind of thing well, badly, mixture of the two? June, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I get to people will tell me everything, you know, when they kind of come to engage with me, and companies that want to do the right thing and offer that outplacement support, sometimes the process could have been improved. Of course, I only hear it kind of from one side, if you like. But I think one of the things that I've noticed is that some clients who are going for interviews in some sectors will say to me, I just don't want to talk about redundancy because I know once I do, people will think I'm I'm a poor performer. So going back to that kind of shame thing we were talking about earlier. And I think when we're talking about redundancy, particularly if you're going for interviews, is to have that sentence ready to frame, actually, without going into loads of detail, but my role, along with several others, as a result of a company-wide restructure with a new CEO, or new funding, whatever the rationale is at a high level, was made redundant. And you keep it really brief, and you just have that sentence ready to go, because there are still, unfortunately, people that will assume that, made redundant, well, it must have just been you, and they must have just picked on you because you were kind of the lowest member of in that team. So I think having that ready is helpful in an interview setting. But I do see a mixed bag to answer your question, Kirsty, of when the processes have gone well and when the process could have gone better.
How about you, Sassy? Do you see it handled well? And what are the sorts of things that they get wrong?
Well, like June, really, some handle quite well, but it is such a personal thing, and how somebody receives the news, and how a manager handles it. Because in a large company, if you've got different managers leading for their areas, perhaps they're all going to handle it differently. As much as HR can try to sort of script them, they could make the wrong call or the wrong decision, and it isn't so much in the information you're telling them, because that can be scripted. It's then the questions, isn't it, back? So it's like, well, what does that mean for me? And all the grey that you can't predict and you can't script for, which often I think trips managers up. But I think I get told that I'm too people-y. But so far, I don't think it's done me wrong. And I think, if you're trying to understand how somebody is feeling, having had that news, and you can then, it was what Priscilla was saying earlier, actually, do we want to have an earlier conversation with this person? Because it might just help them process that a little bit better. We're not even talking about extroverts and introverts and how people process information and disability and all of those factors. So that question around performance is a difficult one, isn't it? Because on one hand, it looks very objective, only if you've got very, very robust processes that have covered all of those things from the outset. But you are going to get a stigma if you're in some sort of a scoring mechanism and you're one of the lower performers. So I think that's a horrendous. I don't think there's a right way necessarily of doing it, unless it's around absolute financial cuts that you've got no alternative reason.
I've seen it done really, really. What's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say nicely, but that's not. I've seen it handled extremely well by smaller founder-led organizations that I've consulted with in the past few years. In large organizations that I've worked with, and I don't think one of these webinars passes without me mentioning that I had a financial services background, and redundancy exercises in financial services are brutal. It is a question of write a big enough check and they'll go away without making a noise. And so they would do the absolute minimum, and it would literally be call someone up to a meeting room one after the other, give them a document, send them home, conveyor belt situation. But they'd leave with so much money that there would be no point in making a tribunal claim because you wouldn't win that much. I mean, that's my experience from the HR side of the table. Unfortunately, not my experience. Wasn't able to retire, but I've seen it, the communication of it, I've seen handled with empathy and with kindness, and with, this is an unavoidable situation. I hate that I'm having to have this conversation, but we really have no alternative, versus, I actually sat in one once where the guy actually read it off a piece of paper, and I was just mortified.
Yeah.
In the end, I think I did that, that wonderful HR interjection, and I'm going to take over from here because this is just painful. And the poor person who was being let go was just sat there like, because not only was he reading, he held it up.
Oh no!
Hello, thank you
like
for
a barrier
joining me today. I was like,
Yeah.
oh no.
No.
So sorry, yeah, Priscilla, how about you? Have you seen the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Definitely. I would say the one thing that I've learned from that, Kirsty, and I do not provide scripts. So, you know, like some people will write lengthy scripts and then I don't do that. I sit with them and I tell them what they need to say. They make a few notes and I'm very clear. I do not want you reading from anything. You need to learn this stuff because it needs to come across in a personal way. But I think I think that message from Meta lands really badly. And I think what they've probably not thought about is the impact on the people who remain in the organization. And I think that's where you have to be thoughtful for how you operate these processes, because it isn't just about the people you're letting go. It's what happens to the people that have survived and are still in the organization and how they perceive you and how you treat people. And if you talk about how you're a great organization, you have all these amazing values and then you treat someone badly who might be a friend of theirs, and they learn about that, that's going to taint it with them. So if you really want to, keep your good employees and you want to retain and have all of that still with you, then I think you need to think about your messaging in relation to that. And when it comes to kind of performance, which is always the mantra in the UK, obviously, performance is a separate process. Like redundancy is redundancy, but one isn't the output for the other one. If you have a performance situation, you address it. If it's redundancy, it's for a different matter. And I know it's a bit slightly different in the US in how things are approached, but yeah, here that's always the mantra I hold. But equally, just message it. I just wish people would think about what they're doing and how that will impact the people exiting and the people staying. That's the thing for me.
I think you could do a whole separate webinar on survivor management, couldn't you? Because I think that is one of the most overlooked aspects of most redundancy exercises it has a huge impact on the people left behind, especially there was a day once where we had to let 80 people go and they wanted them all gone on the same day. And so I had to have one of my team in each of our global offices. I had to go to Singapore for 24 hours and then come back again. And so that was fun. I think I was as long on a plane as I was off a plane. But literally just call them in, give them a letter, off they go. And for the people left behind, for days, it was like, is it going to happen again? Was that it? Because they didn't do any communication around that's a one and done. Mm-hmm. And so people were just fearful. Yeah. And they just did not understand, where their colleagues just disappeared one after the other. It was awful. Mm-hmm. But anyway, thank you all so much for joining me. I think I've said this again, every single one of these webinars, that you could probably talk for about 2 or 3 hours on the subject, but I really appreciate you joining me today. And thank you so much for your input. And for the people that asked questions and commented, thank you very much. I shall get this uploaded to the app, and I'll put links to all of your LinkedIns when I upload it so that people know how to get in touch with you if they want to. But thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been fab.
Yeah, it's really good. We could have talked all day.
Definitely could have done. But thanks again.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.